It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where time seemed to slow down, and the stillness of the small town felt like a blanket wrapped around everything. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm, golden glow over the familiar dirt roads that stretched endlessly through the town. For Kenneth, a 17-year-old black teen, the town was both a home and a cage. It was a place filled with memories, but it also held the weight of dreams that seemed just out of reach. He sat beside his grandmother in their old, rusted car as it rumbled down the dusty road, the engine humming a steady rhythm as they made their way to the local store. Kenneth had grown up in this small town, surrounded by a community that supported one another, but also one where opportunities were scarce. He had big dreams, dreams that felt like they belonged to someone else, someone with more resources, more connections, more chances. Yet, even in the face of the town's limitations, Kenneth remained determined. He was resourceful, always making the best of what he had, and never allowing the smallness of his surroundings to define the size of his ambitions. He glanced at his grandmother, who sat beside him with a gentle smile, her eyes full of warmth and wisdom. She was his rock, the one person who always believed in him, no matter what. "You've got big dreams, baby," she would always say, her voice steady and reassuring. "But you've also got the heart to make them real." Her words echoed in his mind, reminding him of the drive that had kept him going, even when doubt crept in. As they turned a corner, Kenneth spotted a sleek black car on the side of the road. It was a Tesla, parked awkwardly, its hazard lights flashing in the dimming light of the afternoon. The car seemed out of place here, like a visitor from a world far beyond their small town. "Looks like someone's in trouble," his grandmother said, her voice soft but filled with curiosity. Kenneth, always one to help, instinctively slowed the car down and pulled over beside the Tesla. It wasn't just the car that caught his attention. It was the man standing next to it. He was tall, with a calm demeanor that immediately stood out. Kenneth squinted, recognizing him instantly. It was Elon Musk. At first, Kenneth felt a wave of disbelief. He had seen Musk's name in the news, read about his work with Tesla and SpaceX, but to see him standing on the side of the road in his small town was surreal. This wasn't supposed to happen here, in a place where nothing ever felt big enough to attract the attention of someone like Musk. "Need some help," Kenneth called out, his voice a mix of hesitation and confidence. Musk turned, his face lighting up with a smile as he saw Kenneth approach. "You know how to change a tire?" Musk asked, the question almost playful but also sincere. Kenneth glanced down at the flat tire, a simple problem for someone with a bit of know-how. "I can give it a shot," he said, his voice steady. "I've had to make do with what I've got before." The words, "make do with what I've got," felt like a mantra, one that had been ingrained in him by his grandmother. It was how he approached life. Whether it was fixing something around the house or finding ways to push forward when the odds seemed stacked against him. Musk watched him with interest as Kenneth knelt down, pulling out the spare tire from the back of the car and setting to work. Despite the dirt and heat, Kenneth's focus never wavered. He worked quickly, using the limited tools he had with efficiency and skill, his hands moving with practiced ease. In those few minutes, there was no grandiosity, no fanfare, just a quiet exchange between two people, one with the world at his feet and the other just trying to make something of himself. But in that simple moment, something shifted. Kenneth, who had spent his whole life feeling invisible, suddenly found himself in the presence of someone who had changed the world, who had done what Kenneth could only dream of. And yet, there he was, helping him change a tire on the side of a dusty road. For Kenneth, this wasn't just a simple act of kindness. It was a reminder that sometimes, the smallest moments, the ones that seem insignificant, can set something far bigger in motion. But at that moment, he had no idea just how much that one small gesture would change everything as Kenneth's car rumbled down the dusty road. The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the quiet town. The familiar scenery, rustic houses, cracked sidewalks, and the smell of freshly cut grass, faded away as his eyes were drawn to something unusual up ahead. A sleek, black Tesla sat stranded by the side of the road, its hazard lights flashing in the fading light. The side of the car, polished and pristine against the backdrop of the weathered road, felt out of place. It wasn't the kind of vehicle you expected to see on these roads, not in this small town, not in a place where things like Teslas were just a dream for most people. Kenneth squinted, his curiosity piqued. He could see a man standing beside the car, his posture relaxed but purposeful. As he drew closer, Kenneth felt a wave of recognition wash over him. The man looked familiar, but it took a second for Kenneth to place him. It was Elon Musk. Kenneth's heart skipped a beat. Musk, the tech mogul. The man whose name was synonymous with innovation and futuristic technology was standing there in the middle of nowhere, on a dusty road in a small town. The situation felt surreal, like something out of a storybook. How was it even possible that someone like Musk was here? Kenneth slowed the car instinctively, his mind racing. This wasn't something you saw every day, especially in a place where excitement was limited to high school football games and the occasional local fair. For a split second, Kenneth thought about driving on, thinking it wasn't his place to interfere. But as his gaze shifted back to the Tesla and its flashing lights, a different thought crossed his mind. There was no one else around, no mechanics, no roadside assistants, just the two of them, a young kid from a small town and the world's most well-known entrepreneur. Kenneth didn't have time to second-guess himself. He pulled the car to a stop, the tires crunching against the gravel, and before his grandmother could say anything, Kenneth was already opening the door. He hesitated for just a moment as he stepped out, unsure what to say or do. But the thought of letting Musk stand there helpless was something he couldn't bear. Introduction of Elon Musk. Musk turned at the sound of Kenneth's approach, a friendly smile spreading across his face. His calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the rush of thoughts swirling in Kenneth's mind. Elon Musk, the billionaire visionary, the founder of SpaceX and Tesla, was standing right there in front of him, just another person with a flat tire on the side of the road. "Hey there," Musk said, his voice warm, almost casual. "I'm in a bit of a bind. Looks like the tire went flat. Any chance you can help me out?" His tone was friendly, inviting, and completely unpretentious. Kenneth had expected someone like Musk to be aloof, maybe even impatient. But instead, Musk seemed genuinely down to earth, unbothered by the minor inconvenience he found himself in. Kenneth could hardly believe what he was hearing. Yeah," Kenneth stammered. He hadn't planned on this. He wasn't exactly a professional mechanic, but he knew enough about cars to help out in a pinch. "I can give it a try." Initial hesitation, but then the thought hit him. What if he messed it up? What if he couldn't fix it? Or worse, made things worse? His hands were suddenly clammy, and the weight of the moment seemed heavier than it had before. This wasn't just any car. This was a Tesla, a symbol of technological advancement, something so far beyond the scope of his everyday life. And the man standing beside it wasn't just anyone. He was Elon Musk. Kenneth felt the familiar rush of self-doubt. Who was he to help someone like Musk? What if he didn't do it right? But then, he glanced at his grandmother, still sitting in the car, watching him closely. She wasn't the kind to let him shy away from a challenge. She had taught him time and again to never back down from a problem, no matter how big or small. "You've got what it takes," she had always said. And that's all Kenneth needed to hear in that moment. He took a deep breath and walked over to the Tesla, squatting down to assess the situation. There was no time to waste. No one else was around to help, and Musk was counting on him. With that thought, any hesitation left him. Action. Kenneth opened the trunk of his own car, grabbing the spare tire and the tools he had on hand. They weren't the best tools, but they were enough. As he worked, his mind shifted from doubt to focus. He'd changed plenty of tires before, on old family cars, on his grandmother's beat-up sedan. This was no different, he told himself. He set to work, his hands steady as he jacked up the car and loosened the bolts with quick precision. Musk watched him with quiet interest, his arms crossed but not in a way that suggested impatience. Kenneth felt the weight of the situation lift as he fell into the rhythm of the task at hand. He tightened the bolts, lowered the car, and stepped back to admire his work. Musk raised an eyebrow, impressed. "That was fast," he said, a tone of surprise in his voice. "And, pretty impressive." Kenneth wiped the sweat from his brow, a smile creeping up on his face. "It's nothing," he said, trying to sound casual. "Just a little quick thinking. Had to work with what I've got." Musk's smile widened. "I like that," he said. "Seems like you've got a knack for solving problems." Kenneth looked up at Musk, his heart beating a little faster. This was the kind of praise he had never expected to hear from someone like him. "Thanks," he said, feeling a spark of pride. As the two exchanged a few more words, Kenneth couldn't help but feel that this moment, this simple act of helping out, was more than just fixing a flat tire. It was the beginning of something he couldn't yet understand. As Kenneth finished tightening the last bolt, he stepped back and wiped his hands on his jeans, feeling a sense of accomplishment settle over him. The task was simple, but it had been done well. Faster than Kenneth had expected, and certainly faster than he thought a teenager from a small town had any right to handle. He looked at the sleek black Tesla now resting safely on its new tire, and for the briefest moment, he felt like something had shifted. Elon Musk stood beside him, nodding with approval. His gaze was appreciative, but there was something else there too, something that felt like recognition. Kenneth hadn't expected much praise, certainly not from someone like Musk. But as Elon looked him over, his expression softened, and the surprise that had flashed across his face earlier turned into genuine admiration. "That was impressive," Musk said, his voice steady but warm. "You didn't just change that tire. You took charge of the situation. You worked with what you had and made it happen. That's the kind of initiative I like to see." Kenneth felt a rush of pride at the words, but he stayed focused on the task at hand, trying to keep his composure. It wasn't every day that someone like Musk took the time to recognize his efforts, but the words still sank in, deep into his chest, filling him with a quiet sense of validation. Elon continued, "You've got a mind for problem-solving, Kenneth. People like you are rare." He paused, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek business card, the edges sharp and the logo unmistakable. "I want you to keep in touch. Here's my card. If you ever need advice or want to work on something, just give me a call." The card glinted in the light, almost as if it were some sort of treasure. Kenneth's eyes widened slightly. He took the card from Musk's hand, his fingers trembling just a little as they closed around the glossy surface. The words on it were simple: Elon Musk's name, his title, and a number to reach him directly. But to Kenneth, in that moment, the card felt like more than just a business contact. It felt like a doorway opening up to a world that had always seemed impossible for someone like him to enter. For a brief second, Kenneth was speechless. He turned the card over in his hands, feeling its smooth surface, trying to absorb what had just happened. This wasn't just a business card. It was an opportunity. It was a symbol that, somehow, despite the odds and the miles between him and everything he had dreamed of, he was standing on the edge of something greater. A future that had been out of reach was suddenly within his grasp. The moment stretched on, and Kenneth could feel the weight of everything Musk had just said. The skepticism he had always carried about his future, about whether he could make something of himself, began to melt away. Here was Elon Musk, a man whose name was synonymous with innovation, putting his faith in him. Kenneth's mind raced with questions, with excitement, and with disbelief. He tried to compose himself, but the emotions swelled within him. His grandmother's words echoed in his mind. "You've got what it takes." But now, hearing them reflected back in Elon Musk's voice, it felt real. It wasn't just a phrase his grandmother had said to encourage him anymore. It felt like the truth. "Thank you," Kenneth finally said, his voice a little thicker than usual but steady. He held the card close to his chest, trying not to let the wave of gratitude overwhelm him. "I really appreciate this. More than you know." Musk smiled, a small but knowing expression. There was something about the way he looked at Kenneth, like he saw potential, something more than just a boy standing in front of him. It was the look of someone who had seen greatness in others before. "You're welcome," he said simply. "But remember, the hard work is just beginning. Keep thinking big, Kenneth. You're going to surprise yourself one day." Kenneth swallowed hard, his heart racing. The words lingered in the air long after Musk had spoken them, almost like a prophecy. Kenneth had no idea how or when his life might change, but he knew one thing for certain. This moment, this encounter, was a spark. As Musk turned to leave, getting into his Tesla and preparing to drive off, Kenneth stood there, the business card still in his hand, his mind spinning with possibilities. But as he looked down at the card again, a part of him couldn't help but wonder, what if he hadn't stopped to help? What if he hadn't taken the chance? Would this moment have ever come? And yet, here he was, holding something that could change everything. As the car pulled away, the words Musk had left with him echoed once more in his mind. Keep thinking big. Kenneth had no idea where those words would lead, but for the first time, he felt the weight of a future full of promise. IT was a typical Tuesday afternoon when the phone call came. Kenneth had just finished his shift at the local diner and was sitting at the kitchen table, going over some notes for his latest project, a water filtration system he'd been tinkering with in his spare time. The rhythm of the day was the same, predictable and quiet. So, when his phone buzzed on the table, he didn't think much of it at first. But then, he noticed a number, a private line, unfamiliar but somehow important. He answered hesitantly, "Hello? Is this Kenneth Thompson?" The voice on the other end was smooth, professional, definitely not from around here. "Yes, this is Kenneth," he said, still unsure who it could be. "This is Megan from Elon Musk's office. We've been trying to reach you." Kenneth's heart skipped a beat. His mind raced back to the day he met Musk, to the business card, to the words Musk had left him with. Could it really be him? Or was this some kind of prank? "Megan from Elon Musk's office?" he repeated, trying to sound calm, though his hands were shaking. "Yes, that's right," Megan replied. "Mr. Musk was very impressed with your initiative and problem-solving skills when you helped him with his flat tire. He's been following your progress and is interested in offering you an incredible opportunity." Kenneth's pulse quickened, his breath caught in his throat, and for a moment he wasn't sure if he was dreaming. I'm sorry. What did you say?" Megan's voice remained calm but insistent. "Elon wants to meet with you. He'd like you and your grandmother to come to Austin, Texas, to visit Tesla's headquarters. He's offering to mentor you and discuss the possibility of scholarships to further your education in engineering." Kenneth could barely process the words. A scholarship? Mentorship from Elon Musk? His mind swirled with disbelief and excitement all at once. He could feel the weight of the moment settling in, but it still didn't seem real. He looked around the small kitchen. Nothing about this felt like it fit into the world he knew. Everything in his life, everything about this town, felt like it had just been turned upside down. You're serious?" Kenneth finally asked, his voice unsteady. "Absolutely," Megan replied. "Mr. Musk believes in your potential, Kenneth. This is your chance to take the next step. We can book the flights and accommodations for you and your grandmother. We'll take care of everything." Kenneth's hands trembled as he held the phone to his ear. He could hardly breathe, as if the enormity of the opportunity was too much to take in all at once. This is real, he thought. This is actually happening. Without thinking, he looked up at the clock on the wall, as though the ticking hands might somehow help him understand the magnitude of the moment. The reality of it was still sinking in, but then, instinctively, he knew he had to tell someone. He turned toward the hallway, where his grandmother had been sitting in her favorite chair, crocheting a blanket. He rushed into the living room. The phone still pressed his ear. "Grandma," he said, his voice wavering, "you're not going to believe this." His grandmother looked up, sensing the urgency in his tone. She put down the crochet hook, her eyes narrowing with concern. "What is it, baby?" Kenneth took a deep breath, his chest tight with a mix of emotions. "It's Elon Musk. He wants us to come to Texas. He wants to meet me, to offer me a scholarship and to mentor me. He said he's been following my work. The words tumbled out, and for a moment there was a stunned silence between them. His grandmother's eyes widened, her hand flying to her mouth as tears began to well up. She stood up slowly, the shock too overwhelming for words. Is this real?" she whispered, as if afraid to believe it. Kenneth nodded, unable to fully believe it himself. "Yes, Grandma, it's real. He said they'll send us to Austin, all expenses paid. It's the opportunity of a lifetime." His grandmother blinked back tears, and in a moment that felt like everything else faded away, she pulled him into a tight hug. "I always knew you were meant for great things, Kenneth," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "This is your chance, baby. You can't let it slip away. You've worked so hard for this, and now you've earned it. You've got to go. You've got to take it." Kenneth stood there, in the embrace of the one person who had always believed in him, feeling the weight of her words settle into his soul. He had never been more certain of anything in his life. This wasn't just an opportunity to meet one of the most innovative minds of the century. It was a chance to change everything. It was a chance to prove that the dreams he'd held on to for so long weren't just fantasies. They were possible. "Thank you, Grandma," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. "I won't let you down. I'll take it. I'll make it happen." As the tears rolled down his grandmother's cheeks, she smiled up at him, her pride radiating in every line of her face. "I know you will. You've always had it in you." And in that moment, Kenneth knew that this call, this opportunity, was more than just a dream coming true. It was the beginning of something much bigger than anything he had ever imagined. Kenneth couldn't believe it. The news of his upcoming trip to Tesla's headquarters had spread like wildfire through his small town. What had once felt like a world of few opportunities was suddenly buzzing with excitement. Neighbors, friends, and even distant relatives stopped by the house to congratulate him, each one offering their own form of support, encouragement, and advice. "Make sure you stay humble, Kenneth," Mr. Harold, the town's oldest and most outspoken resident, advised. "You get in there, show them what you've got, but don't forget where you came from." Others offered more practical suggestions, like how to make the most of his time in Austin, which restaurants to check out, and what to wear to make a good impression. To Kenneth, their words meant more than advice. They were a testament to how far he had come. The whole town felt like it was lifting him up, propelling him toward a future none of them could have imagined. Still, as the days grew closer to his departure, Kenneth couldn't shake the feeling of being overwhelmed. He'd spent 17 years in this town, with its slow rhythms and familiar faces. Leaving it all behind was both exciting and terrifying, but it wasn't just his own future he was thinking of. It was the future of everyone who had ever believed in him. On the morning of his departure, the reality set in. His grandmother, as always, was the first to rise. She had already packed a small bag with snacks for the journey. Despite her outward calm, Kenneth could see the bittersweet emotions in her eyes. This wasn't just a trip. This was the moment when he left behind the life they had built together. "Come here, baby," she said softly as they stood by the door. Her arms enveloped him in a tight embrace, one that held all the love, all the pride, and all the hope she had for him. "No matter how far you go, I'm always with you. You carry my heart with you every step of the way." Kenneth felt a lump in his throat. For all the excitement and anticipation that came with the opportunity, the thought of leaving her behind made it harder than he had imagined. "I'll call you every day, Grandma. I promise." "I know you will, baby," she replied with a smile, brushing a tear from her eye. "You've got everything you need inside of you. You're going to do great things." Kenneth nodded, holding back his own tears as he hugged her one last time before heading out. His heart was torn between the comfort of his small town and the promise of something bigger. But there was no turning back now. This was his chance. His only chance to make something of himself, not just for him, but for everyone who had ever believed in him. As they drove to the airport, Kenneth felt the weight of his grandmother's words on his shoulders, but there was also a spark of excitement. He was finally going to see the world beyond the dusty roads of Mississippi. His flight to Austin was the first step into a new world, and with every mile the car covered, he could feel the life he knew slipping away and a new chapter unfolding. The flight was a whirlwind of emotions. He was nervous, of course, nervous about what was ahead, nervous about how he would fit in with the people at Tesla, and nervous about whether he could live up to the potential Musk saw in him. But amid the nerves, there was an undeniable excitement. He was going to Austin, the home of Tesla, where innovation and creativity ruled the day. It felt like a dream, and yet it was happening. When the plane finally touched down in Austin, Kenneth felt like he had entered another world entirely. The airport itself was different from the small, quiet terminals he had grown used to. There were people from all walks of life, with conversations in different languages and the unmistakable hum of progress in the air. Everything felt bigger, faster, and more ambitious than anything he had known. As his ride took him to the Tesla facility, the towering, sleek buildings of the company loomed in the distance. The campus was like nothing Kenneth had ever seen. Glass walls, futuristic architecture, and the hum of electric cars charging in the parking lot. It was like stepping into a world he had only read about in books or seen in movies. When they pulled up to the entrance, Kenneth's breath caught in his chest. The Tesla campus wasn't just a place of business. It was a beacon of innovation, a tangible symbol of everything Kenneth had ever dreamed of. As he walked through the gates, past the sleek cars and busy engineers, he couldn't help but feel like he was in the right place, that this was where his journey was truly beginning. Every step he took felt surreal, like something out of a dream. And as he entered the building, he knew this was only the start of something that would change his life forever. The moment Kenneth stepped into the Tesla facility, his senses were overwhelmed by the sheer scale of everything around him. But it was the person waiting for him at the entrance who truly took him by surprise. Elon Musk stood there, a calm, approachable figure who immediately made Kenneth feel at ease despite the surreal nature of the meeting. "Welcome, Kenneth," Musk said with a genuine smile. "It's good to finally meet you." He extended his hand and Kenneth shook it, his nerves settling as he realized that Musk wasn't just a visionary behind Tesla. He was a person who valued initiative and drive, no different than any other person who had recognized Kenneth's potential. Musk turned to Kenneth's grandmother, who had been quietly standing beside him, her eyes wide with awe. "And this must be your amazing grandmother," he said warmly. "I've heard so much about you." Kenneth's grandmother, who had always been a pillar of strength, smiled shyly, clearly humbled by the attention. "Just a proud grandma," she replied with a twinkle in her eye, her voice thick with emotion. Elon then led them on a tour of Tesla's expansive campus. As they walked through the sleek buildings, Kenneth couldn't help but marvel at the innovative designs and state-of-the-art engineering processes. Musk spoke passionately about the future of electric vehicles, solar technology, and sustainable energy. It was all so fascinating. Every machine, every blueprint, every employee seemed to be working in sync toward a greater vision. "This is where it all starts," Musk explained as they passed a team of engineers working on new prototypes. "Every great idea begins with a thought, a spark of imagination. You have to believe in it, push through the challenges, and keep creating." Kenneth listened intently, absorbing every word. It was one thing to hear about Tesla's groundbreaking work, but seeing it firsthand was something else entirely. He felt like a small part of a much larger movement, a movement that he now realized he could one day contribute to in his own way. At the end of the tour, Musk led them to a conference room with a large window that overlooked the campus. He gestured for Kenneth and his grandmother to sit. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation on that dusty road," Musk said, his tone becoming more serious. "Kenneth, you have the kind of ingenuity and resourcefulness we need in this field. I believe in your potential." Kenneth's heart raced, unsure of what was coming next. Musk smiled and continued, "So, I want to offer you something. A full scholarship to a prestigious engineering program, along with mentorship from me and our team here at Tesla. I want to help you realize the dreams you've always had, and I believe this is the best way to do it." For a moment, Kenneth couldn't speak. The words felt too big to process, too unreal to comprehend. His mind raced, and his emotions swirled inside him. Excitement, disbelief, gratitude, and a deep sense of pride. The same person who had once been on the side of a dusty road, just helping out a stranger with a flat tire, was now being offered a scholarship to one of the most innovative companies in the world. It was everything he had dreamed of, yet it felt too perfect to be true. He glanced at his grandmother, whose hands were clasped tightly in her lap. Her face was flushed with emotion, and a tear slipped down her cheek. She had always believed in him, even when no one else did. And now, here they were, standing in this moment of triumph together. Kenneth's voice broke through the quiet, thick with emotion. "I don't know what to say, Elon. This is everything. I never imagined something like this could happen to someone like me." Elon Musk gave him a reassuring smile. "That's why I'm here, Kenneth. I see something in you, something special, and I want to help you get there. I know this is just the beginning of your journey." Kenneth was overwhelmed by gratitude. He stood up, his hands trembling as he tried to express how much this moment meant to him. Thank you so much. I won't let you down." His grandmother, who had been holding back tears, finally let them fall freely. She reached over, hugging Kenneth tightly, whispering in his ear, "I knew you were meant for great things." Kenneth's heart swelled as he held her close. In that moment, all the challenges he had faced, all the struggles of his small-town life, seemed to melt away. This was the start of something big, something that would not only change his life, but could one day change the world. As they stood there, in that room filled with opportunity, Kenneth knew that this was more than just a scholarship or a mentorship. It was a chance to make a difference, to follow in the footsteps of those who had inspired him, and to prove to himself and to everyone who had believed in him that anything was possible. As Kenneth stepped onto the campus of his prestigious new college in California, the weight of it all hit him. The towering buildings, the sprawling grounds, and the fast-paced energy of students rushing to and from classes felt overwhelming. It was a world so different from the small town he had grown up in, and for a moment he wondered if he truly belonged here. The campus was a whirlwind of activity, and the faces around him were unfamiliar. Students from all over the world, many of whom came from families with wealth and privilege. Kenneth couldn't help but feel out of place. The dorm rooms were sleek and modern. Everything seemed so polished, so effortless. He, on the other hand, had arrived with little more than his backpack and a sense of determination. The change was stark, and the adjustment felt monumental. He missed the quiet of his small town, the familiarity of his grandmother's kitchen, and the comfort of knowing exactly who he was in his community. Here, it felt like no one knew him, and in some ways, it felt like no one cared. But it wasn't just the physical surroundings that made this transition difficult. College life was proving to be an academic challenge in ways he hadn't anticipated. The courses were intense, the lectures fast-paced, and the assignments piled up faster than he could keep track. Each exam, each paper, felt like a mountain he was struggling to climb. The pressure mounted, and at times, Kenneth felt as though he was falling behind, unable to keep up with the constant demands of college life. But what troubled him the most wasn't just the academics. It was the feeling of inadequacy that crept in whenever he looked around at his peers. Many of them came from families that had resources, privileged backgrounds with tutors, private schools, and endless opportunities. Kenneth couldn't help but feel like he was swimming against the tide. The doubts crept in. Was he good enough? Was he really cut out for this life, this world? At night, when the dorm became quiet and the weight of the day settled in, Kenneth found himself battling with self-doubt. The words his grandmother had spoken to him before he left echoed in his mind. "No matter how far you go, I'm always with you." He clung to those words, but at times, they didn't feel like enough. He remembered what Musk had told him, too. "Keep thinking big, Kenneth. You're going to surprise yourself one day." It was hard to believe in those words when everything around him seemed so much bigger than he had ever imagined. In one particularly tough week, Kenneth hit a breaking point. After a particularly brutal calculus exam, he found himself staring at his paper, unsure if he had even passed. His classmates, many of whom had breezed through the material, seemed unaffected by the same challenges. Meanwhile, Kenneth felt like he was drowning in a sea of impossible expectations. But then, something changed. He remembered the notes his grandmother had slipped into his suitcase, the ones filled with reminders of his strength, his determination, and his potential. He thought back to that dusty road, when he had stopped to help a stranger change a tire, and how that single act had set his life on a new path. If he could face that challenge, surely he could face this one too. With renewed determination, Kenneth decided to dig deeper. He stayed up late studying, breaking down each complex problem step by step. He asked for help when he needed it, whether it was from a professor or a classmate who had already mastered the material. He focused on finding solutions rather than dwelling on the obstacles in his path. It wasn't easy. There were times when he wanted to give up, when the challenges seemed insurmountable. But the lessons he had learned from his grandmother and from Musk's words kept him moving forward. He learned to adapt, to embrace the discomfort of change, and to push through the moments of self-doubt. Every time he succeeded, whether it was solving a difficult problem or getting through a tough week, he felt a little bit more like the person he wanted to become. As the semester went on, Kenneth began to find his rhythm. The classes didn't get any easier, but he had learned how to manage the workload, how to ask for help when he needed it, and most importantly, how to believe in himself again. He may not have had the same privileges as some of his peers, but he had something just as valuable: a fierce determination and an unwavering belief that he belonged here just as much as anyone else. One evening, after a particularly successful presentation in one of his engineering classes, Kenneth stood in front of the mirror in his dorm room. For the first time in a while, he smiled. He had made it through the hardest part. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. And no matter how far he had come or how far he would go, he knew one thing for certain: he would keep moving forward. Just as he always had, Kenneth had always been passionate about finding practical solutions to the problems that plagued his community. But his project for sustainable, low-cost water filtration systems had now taken on a life of its own. What started as a simple idea to bring clean water to small towns like his own had transformed into something much bigger. The prototype he had developed was making waves in the engineering world, catching the attention of industry leaders and innovators who were drawn to its practicality and potential to change lives. His hard work and dedication paid off when he was invited to present his project at a startup conference. It was a major opportunity, one that he hadn't expected. As he stepped onto the stage in front of a room full of investors and entrepreneurs, his heart raced. The crowd was a sea of faces, some skeptical, others hopeful, but all eyes were on him. Despite the nerves, Kenneth pushed forward, presenting his idea with the same confidence he had built over the past few years. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment, and then the applause began. It was genuine, full of admiration for the young man who had brought a practical solution to a real-world problem. Investors were immediately interested, eager to help him scale his project and bring it to communities that needed it the most. Kenneth could hardly believe what was happening. Just a few years ago, he had been a teenager on a dusty road, helping a stranger with a flat tire. Now, he was standing at the forefront of something that had the potential to change the lives of thousands of people. The recognition came quickly. The project was expanded into several states, and soon local governments and nonprofit organizations were eager to partner with Kenneth. As the water filtration systems began to take root in underserved areas, Kenneth's story spread even further. He had gone from a small-town teen with a dream to a symbol of hope and innovation. His hard work had paid off, and the impact was undeniable. And then, as if to remind him of how far he had come, Kenneth received a text from Musk. It was simple but powerful. "Proud of you. Keep going." It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to Kenneth. Musk had seen something in him from the very beginning, and now he was watching his dreams come to life. It was a reminder that Kenneth wasn't alone in his journey, that his mentor, the man who had given him the business card all those years ago, was still cheering him on. As Kenneth's water filtration project continued to expand, The impact on communities was immense. The systems he had designed brought clean water to small towns across the country, and people were finally able to access the one thing that so many had taken for granted: clean drinking water. What Kenneth had set out to do had grown into something much more powerful. He was not only solving a problem, but he was also inspiring others to believe that they could make a difference too. Kenneth's influence spread far beyond the projects he had initiated. He was invited to speak at conferences where he shared his story of resilience and innovation. His journey, from the dusty road in Mississippi to a leading innovator, became a source of inspiration for others. He spoke about the power of perseverance, about how the smallest actions could lead to the biggest changes, and how each person had the ability to make an impact, no matter their background. It wasn't just about the water filtration systems anymore. It was about the ripple effect his story had created. Kenneth's words resonated with young people across the country, especially those who came from backgrounds similar to his own. They saw him not just as an engineer, but as proof that dreams could become reality with hard work, ingenuity, and determination. Kenneth was more than just a success story. He was a beacon of possibility for those who had once felt like they didn't belong in spaces like this. But even as his fame grew, Kenneth remained grounded. He never forgot where he came from or the people who had supported him along the way. In fact, he made it a point to give back. He began mentoring young people, sharing his journey with them, and encouraging them to dream big, just as he had once been encouraged. He made it clear that their dreams, no matter how impossible they seemed, were worth pursuing. Kenneth's mentorship wasn't just about providing advice. It was about showing young people that they had the power to create change. He often returned to his hometown, speaking at local schools and working with young aspiring engineers. He shared his own experiences, showing them that if he could go from a small-town kid with a dream to an innovator changing lives, they could do the same. In those moments, as he looked into the eyes of young people who saw him as a mentor and role model, Kenneth realized something profound. His success wasn't just about what he had achieved. It was about the lives he had touched and the future he had inspired. His journey had come full circle, and he knew that the legacy he was creating was far more important than any recognition or accolade. It was about creating opportunities for others, about empowering them to believe in their own potential. And as Kenneth continued his work, he understood that the ripple effect would never stop. It would continue to grow, touching more lives and creating new possibilities for generations to come. After years of success and transformation, Kenneth returned to the town that had shaped him. It had been a long journey from that dusty road where he had helped Elon Musk with a flat tire to becoming a renowned innovator and engineer. Now, standing at the threshold of his hometown, Kenneth couldn't help but feel a sense of fulfillment. It was time to share his success with those who had always believed in him, especially the one person who had been his constant support, his grandmother. Kenneth had kept in touch with her over the years, but he hadn't had the chance to visit for a while. This time, however, he was bringing someone special with him. He had surprised her with a visit, but what she didn't expect was that her grandson would show up with none other than Elon Musk himself. When Elon stepped onto the porch, extending his hand and greeting her with a warm smile, Kenneth's grandmother burst into laughter, clearly delighted by the unexpected company. "It's just Grandma to you," she joked, pulling Musk into a hug. The three of them spent the afternoon reminiscing about the past, with Kenneth and Musk sharing stories of their work, their successes, and the incredible journey that had brought them together. It was a moment of gratitude and reflection, one that Kenneth knew he would never forget. As they sat on the porch, Kenneth couldn't help but look around at the familiar sights, the old trees, the quiet streets, the sense of community that had always surrounded him. It was here that his journey had begun, and it was here that his story had inspired others. The town, which had once seemed small and isolated, now felt like a place of infinite possibility. Kenneth's rise from a small-town kid to a global innovator had become a symbol of hope for the entire community. The people who had watched him grow up, who had seen his struggles, now saw him as proof that dreams could come true, no matter where you started. Kenneth's success was not just his own. It was the success of the town that had nurtured him. The community felt a sense of pride every time they heard his name mentioned in the media or saw him on stage speaking about his work. They celebrated his achievements as their own because they knew that if one of their own could make it, it meant that anything was possible for them too. The culmination of Kenneth's journey came in the form of a speech at his alma mater, the school where he had once sat in classrooms, unsure of what his future would hold. Now, he was returning as a guest speaker, ready to impart the lessons he had learned along the way. The auditorium was filled with eager students, some inspired by his story, and others looking for guidance on how to shape their own futures. Standing in front of the crowd, Kenneth felt the weight of the moment. He had come full circle. From a teenager struggling to find his path, to a global innovator who had made a real difference in the world. He took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice steady and filled with purpose. "It doesn't matter where you come from," he said. "What matters is what you do with what you have. The opportunities may not always be easy to find, but they are always there if you're willing to look for them. The road may be long and it may be hard, but the journey is worth it." Kenneth's words resonated with the students, and as he spoke, he saw the same spark in their eyes that he had once had. He knew that many of them were facing their own challenges, unsure of how to take the first step toward their dreams. But he also knew that if they held on to hope, and if they acted on the opportunities that came their way, they could achieve greatness just as he had. As the crowd erupted in applause, Kenneth felt a wave of emotion wash over him. He looked out at the students, at the teachers who had supported him, and at the community that had always believed in him. He thought of his grandmother, who had always told him that no matter how far he went, she would always be with him. As the applause continued, Kenneth silently reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. It had all started with a simple act of kindness on a dusty road, a moment that had changed his life forever. And now, as he stood in front of the crowd, he knew that the ripple effect of that kindness would continue to spread, inspiring others to take their own steps toward greatness. The lesson was clear. Kindness, opportunity, and the willingness to help others could open doors to a future you never imagined. And just like the tire that needed fixing on that fateful day, sometimes the smallest act of kindness could change everything. People often forget that how they treat others is the best way to judge them in a world that is focused on fame, money, and rank. The wealthy founder of SpaceX and Tesla, Elon Musk, is used to getting attention. But as he sat in his office, away from the noise of business and new ideas, he couldn't get rid of one question. How do people really treat others when they don't know who they are? From nothing, Elon built an empire that pushed the limits of science and space travel. It was hard for him to ignore how people treated him because of his fame, though. Was he respected because of what he had done or because he was rich and powerful? Something very important became clear to him after talking with a coworker. Elon thought, "People treat me differently because they know who I am. Suppose I wasn't Elon Musk? What if I were just another person having a hard time?" He was very interested in the idea. He was curious about how people would treat him if they didn't know who he was. There was no money or fame, just a normal guy. It was this thought that led to one of the most interesting studies of human behavior that anyone had ever seen. Elon had to disappear in order to start his project. Yes, but not in the way most people think. He wasn't trying to hide anything from everyone. He tried to see it without the star-studded lens of fame. To see how people would treat him if he didn't have his fame and money to protect him. He walked into a small thrift store and looked like any other customer. There weren't any high-end name brands or custom suits on the racks of used clothes. They looked like they came from a different time. Elon carefully chose a pair of worn-out sneakers, faded pants, and a simple jacket that made him look like he was having a hard time with life. IT wasn't just clothes, though. He needed more. His look was quickly changed by a group of makeup artists. They took away the billionaire's confident look with a few touches of makeup and put on a face that people might not notice in public. Scruffy, unwashed, and messy. Putting a wig on top of his head finished the change. This wasn't just a cover-up. To see how people would treat him if they didn't know who he was, it was a test. seeking to see if the kindness and understanding that people are capable of could really go beyond money, fame, and how someone looks. Elon went to a high-end restaurant in Santa Fe, New Mexico, for the next part of the experiment. This restaurant is famous for its delicious food and great service. When he walked into the Copper Elm, the sound of his worn-out shoes hitting the shiny hardwood floor was very loud and stood out against the room's quiet beauty. Elon walked up to the hostess stand while wearing his mask. He seemed quite confident, but he was still not at all like the slick businessman he really was. Taking into account the fact that his look would likely be the first and most important test of his experiment, he carefully planned this moment. The hostess barely looked at him when he walked in. She'd been greeting the well-dressed people who came in before him. She looked at his dirty clothes and shaved face, and for a moment her face turned serious. In an instant she said, "I'm sorry, sir. Tonight is full." Elon just stood there and watched. Not only was being turned down painful, but also being ignored as if he didn't exist. The waitress didn't even ask his name or see if there were any open tables in the back. She also didn't give him a chance to explain. What he looked like already helped her figure out who he was. That was the first time I realized how much people judged others based on how they looked. Elon did not show anger or rage. He kept his cool and let the moment take over him. He quietly watched how the other customers, the staff, and even the other people who were watching from their tables responded while he waited for the next part of the experiment. Then, though, something strange happened. A young server named Sophia spoke up after watching the scene play out in silence. Something inside her shook when she saw the awkward tension and the hostess's dismissive look. She could not remain still. Sophia walked up to Elon carefully and said, "I'm sorry about that, sir." Her voice was soft and real. "Right over here. We do have a seat open. I'll get you set up if you want to follow me." Sophia didn't pay attention to the hostess's surprised look as she led Elon to a table near the kitchen doors. While it wasn't the best spot, it was somewhere he could sit without being judged. He looked up at her with a quiet, grateful smile as he sat down. Sophia gave him a place because she liked him as a person. She had no idea who he was, didn't recognize him, and didn't care how he looked. She knew that he was more than what he wore because she could see past the clothes. She picked understanding over assumptions and kindness over bias at that time. She showed him the same attention she would any other customer while taking his order by making small talk, giving him a menu, and making him feel at ease. He wasn't treated like a stranger. She treated him like a person who deserved respect, which wasn't often seen in a place where looks were everything. But even though Sophia was nice, the other people at the table weren't very friendly. There were whispers going around the room, like a wave of judgment going from table to table. Elon could pick up on bits of talk, and it was clear that the other people in the bar didn't like having him there. Why does he have to be here? One of the diners grumbled something and looked over at Elon. Clearly disgusted by how he looked, another person was clearly upset about seeing someone who didn't fit the restaurant's image. This is going to scare off the regulars. They said it became clearer to Elon as he heard more. People were judged by how they looked, not by who they really were. It seemed like the people eating there couldn't believe that someone with his worn-out clothes and unshaven face could fit in a fancy restaurant. For them, how they looked was everything. Elon thought about everything as he took it all in. It was exactly what he was interested in. How quickly people could judge others based on how they dressed, looked, and seemed to the world. He didn't talk to the people in the restaurant or ask them what they thought. He did nothing but watch as the uncomfortable truth of human bias played out around him. At the end of the meal, the stress in the restaurant became clear. It felt like there were a lot of opinions and assumptions in the air that people weren't saying. Elon savored his food as he slowly finished it. Because he knew what was about to happen, Elon got up, and his old sneakers scuffed across the floor. All eyes were on him for the first time that night, as the sound of his steps echoed through the room. From the sidelines, the boss looked at him with disapproval and walked up to him, making it clear that he was ready to tell him to leave. Elon didn't want to leave yet, though. He put up his hand and stopped the boss in his tracks. He took a deep breath and slowly took off the wig. Showing who he really was, the voice of Elon was cool but authoritative as he said, "Yes, it's me, Elon Musk. I wasn't the man you know tonight, though. I was interested in how you would treat someone who isn't famous or rich. What would you do if you saw someone you didn't know? The room went quiet. People in the restaurant let out gasps as they slowly tried to understand what had just happened. One of the people they had just raided and fired was none other than Elon Musk, a billionaire businessman. You could feel the shock. And the room was full of people who were confused, embarrassed, and shocked. But at that moment, everyone knew the truth. Elon had seen it all. The looks of contempt, the comments, and the judgments. Just because of how he looked. His words were like a lesson that everyone in the room could hear. Elon turned his attention back to Sophia as the room fell into a stunned quiet. He called her forward, and her name could be heard in the empty room. Sophia took a slow, uncertain step toward him at first, eye in his pocket. Elon pulled out an envelope, which he gave to her with a soft smile. A loving note and a check for $50,000 were inside the envelope. Sophia slowly opened it and read the note out loud, her hands shaking. "Thank you for being kind. Follow your dreams with this. You can go to culinary school or open your own business." As tears came to her eyes, her voice cracked. The room changed from being tense and judgmental to being calm and peaceful. Some of the diners had talked about Elon behind his back before, but the act made them feel better. They saw Sophia wipe away tears as she talked about how grateful she was. People at the table who used to talk behind their napkins were now sitting quietly and thinking. Some people in the room started to think about why they had judged him so quickly. There was a deep sense of shame in the room. Why did they let how someone looked affect how they treated them? The boss looked uncomfortable because he or she had helped treat Elon badly. Some staff members who had been there the whole time now respected Sophia more than they did before. They had changed their minds not because of a tip, but because of something they had just seen. An act of kindness that went beyond money and status. Sophia took the note out of her pocket one last time as she was leaving work and read it to herself in silence. Kindness is money that can never be taken away. Spend it again. She smiled, and there was a quiet look in her eyes. She was aware that this event would alter the way she saw the world. She would no longer judge people based on how they looked or their social standing. Many people never really understand this lesson. Being kind isn't something you do based on what someone can do for you. Every person has the power to change their lives with just one choice, Sophia, and the restaurant were not the only ones who were part of the trial. A lot of people heard about Elon's secret test. Social media and news sites all had stories about Elon Musk's experiment to see how people really are. Everyone began to talk about what really matters in relationships. Being kind, Sophia, the young server who was kind to Elon, became a symbol of kindness and understanding in the service industry. Some people told her they liked how she stood up when no one else did. And Elon's message, that small acts can reveal big truths, hit home all over the world. When asked about it again, Elon said, "The smallest things show the biggest truths. Being kind isn't about big actions. It's about the little things we do every day." This experiment turned into a strong message to the whole world from a simple question about how people treat each other. A lesson about being kind to each other, no matter how much money or power we have. Sophia finally went to a cooking school a few months later. The note Elon had given her felt heavy in her heart on her first day. The things he wrote weren't just about money. They were also about how important it is to be kind along the way. Believe in yourself and follow your dreams. She kept the note in her pocket and looked at it as she walked across campus. With a smile on her face, she went into the future with new hope, drive, and a sense of what she was here to do. One small act of kindness, one strange attempt, and a world that is a little nicer. It was just another busy day at the airport. People hurried through the terminal, dragging suitcases, catching flights, and barely sparing a glance at the others around them. Among the crowd was one man who seemed to blend in effortlessly, though if you looked closely, you'd notice something different about him. This man wasn't some ordinary traveler. He was Elon Musk, the tech mogul who had changed the world with companies like Tesla and SpaceX. But today, he wasn't interested in being recognized. He was tired. He was tired of the constant attention, the selfies, and the whispers that followed him wherever he went. Elon wasn't looking for a scene today. He pulled his hoodie low over his face, trying to hide his identity as best as possible. He wore an old pair of jeans and scuffed sneakers, which looked like they'd been through countless miles of travel. It was an intentional choice. He wanted to be just another face in the crowd, a regular person like everyone else. He had no interest in drawing attention to himself. He kept his head down as he walked through the airport, moving quickly through the crowd. The last thing he wanted was to get stopped by a fan or, worse, someone who tried to debate him about the latest news. Today, he was just Elon Musk, a guy trying to catch a flight, hoping for a peaceful moment away from the spotlight. As Elon stood in the first-class line, trying to remain unnoticed, a woman in her 40s or 50s approached. She was impeccably dressed, her hair perfectly styled, her makeup flawless, and her outfit screamed high-end designer. She walked confidently, saying she believed she belonged wherever she went, and right now, she thought she owned the space around her. Her eyes scanned the line, and that's when they landed on Elon. She paused for a moment, sizing him up, her gaze narrowing. Something about him, his casual look, the hoodie pulled low over his face, didn't sit right with her. Without hesitation, she marched up to him. Her heels clicked sharply on the polished floor, each step filled with purpose, as though she had already decided who he was. "Are you lost or something?" she asked, her voice cutting through the airport's murmur. Her tone wasn't curious. It was accusing, demanding an answer. Elon, taken aback by the sudden confrontation, didn't respond right away. He knew better than to engage in a situation like this without thinking. He raised his head slightly, just enough for her to see his eyes. The hoodie partially hid his face, but that didn't stop her from seizing him. She stared at him momentarily before speaking again, this time with a sneer. "This is the first-class line," she said, eyes running over him in disbelief. "You don't look like you belong here." Elon took a deep breath, holding his ground. He wasn't here to argue with anyone. He was trying to get on his flight. "I have a first-class ticket," he replied calmly, steadying his voice. But the woman wasn't having it. Her laugh was sharp, almost mocking, as if she didn't believe his words. "Sure you do," she scoffed, crossing her arms. "Look at you. You're not fooling anyone." She didn't stop there. The mocking continued, her tone growing louder as if trying to make a scene. "If you don't move," she threatened, "I'll call security." Elon stood still, his expression calm, his patience starting to wear thin. But he refused to let his frustration show. He knew better than to escalate things. But this woman was relentless, and it was clear she wouldn't let him go without a fight. Karen's frustration grew with each passing second. The quiet murmurs around them seemed to fuel her anger, and she wasn't about to back down now. "If you don't move," she said again, her voice rising in pitch, "I'll call security." Her words were sharp, and the crowd around them began to shift, sensing the tension. Elon stood there, still calm, his eyes focused on her, but he said nothing. He had dealt with his fair share of confrontations over the years, and he knew that getting drawn into a shouting match wouldn't help anyone. But Karen wasn't going to let it go. She scolded him, her voice growing louder, drawing the other passengers' attention. Some people looked at each other in confusion, while others watched, unsure of what was happening. Without warning, Karen turned toward a nearby security officer who had been standing a little further down the line. She raised her hand, her finger pointed directly at Elon as though she had just found a criminal. "Officer," she called, her voice carrying through the terminal. "This man is trying to cut into the first-class line. He doesn't have a proper ticket." She emphasized every word, her expression one of pure certainty. The officer, a stocky man in a neat uniform, began walking toward them. His eyes scanned the situation, noticing Karen's agitated stance and Elon's calm demeanor. He arrived at their side, pausing to assess what was going on. "Ma'am, what seems to be the issue?" the officer asked in a neutral, professional tone. His eyes shifted between Karen and Elon, trying to understand the situation. Karen didn't waste a second. She launched into her accusations, her words spilling out quickly. This man doesn't belong here. He's holding up the line, and he's making a scene. I demand you remove him immediately. Elon remained still, his gaze calm, as he listened to Karen. He knew that responding with frustration would only make things worse. He didn't need to explain himself, but he also understood that this situation wouldn't end until he showed the officer the truth. With a quiet sigh, Elon reached into his backpack, pulled out his neatly folded first-class ticket, and handed it to the officer. He didn't say a word. He just held out the ticket and waited. The officer took it, unfolded it, and examined the details. His brow furrowed slightly as he looked at the ticket, then glanced back at Karen. "This is a first-class ticket," the officer confirmed, his voice firm but polite. He didn't look at Elon, but turned his gaze back to Karen, who now stood frozen, her earlier confidence slipping away. Karen's face drained of color, her expression shifting from certainty to confusion. She blinked a few times, trying to process what had just happened. "That can't be right," she muttered, her voice shaking. She had no words left, only a growing sense of disbelief. The officer nodded, his stance unyielding. "Yes, ma'am. This ticket is valid." The air around them shifted. The crowd, murmuring and whispering, now seemed to hold their breath as they watched the woman's demeanor crumble. The whispers grew louder, and some passengers looked at Elon with a mix of curiosity and recognition. The realization began to spread through the crowd, but Karen was too stunned to notice. Her confidence, once so unwavering, was now gone. And as she stood there, her mouth slightly open, she realized she had made a grave mistake. The air around them thickened as Karen stood frozen, trying to process what had happened. The officer's confirmation of Elon's ticket left her speechless, and the growing murmurs from the surrounding crowd only added to her discomfort. Her eyes flickered from the officer back to Elon, but something was different now. The pieces were falling into place, and she could feel the weight of her mistake. It started with a whisper here and there, passengers turning their heads, eyes widening in recognition. "Wait!" Karen's voice faltered. Her gaze shifted, her expression uncertain. "That can't be." She trailed off, her words dying in her throat as the whispers grew louder. She glanced at Elon again, a flicker of realization passing over her face. She'd seen him on television, in the news, perhaps in one of his infamous tweets. Her eyes widened as she looked at him again, the truth beginning to hit her. The crowd's murmurs grew into louder whispers of recognition. People leaned in, eager to look at the man standing before them. Elon, sensing her realization, remained composed. He didn't say a word at first. Instead, with deliberate calm, he pulled the hood of his sweatshirt back, fully revealing his face. When his features were exposed, the crowd went silent for a split second, then erupted in hushed gasps and exclamations. It was as though a light bulb had gone off in everyone's mind. They knew who he was now. Elon Musk, the tech mogul, the founder of SpaceX and Tesla, who had revolutionized the world in more ways than one. Karen's face drained of color as the recognition settled in. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. The confident woman who had been so sure of herself moments ago now stood speechless, her earlier bravado wholly gone. Elon's expression remained calm, his eyes steady as he looked at her. There was no anger or malice in his gaze, just a quiet, composed certainty. He addressed Karen directly, his voice firm but measured. "I tried to tell you," he said evenly, his tone calm but carrying a weight of quiet authority. "But you didn't want to listen." Karen opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. She couldn't speak. The gravity of the situation and the embarrassment of her mistake left her paralyzed. The crowd continued to watch, some with pity in their eyes, others with a sense of quiet judgment. Elon didn't wait for a reply. He stood tall, his voice calm and unwavering. "Judging someone by how they look says more about you than it does about the person you're judging," he continued, his gaze never leaving hers. His words hung in the air, and Karen's humiliation was palpable. She had made a wrongful assumption based solely on Elon's casual appearance, and now, in front of a growing crowd, she had no choice but to face the consequences of her actions. The crowd, sensing the tension, shifted uncomfortably. Some exchanged glances. Others nodded in agreement with Elon's words. It was clear that, at that moment, the tables had turned, and Karen knew it. Karen stood there, frozen, her face flushed with embarrassment. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but the words wouldn't come. Her earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by the cold sting of regret. The realization of what she'd just done, accusing one of the most well-known figures of something wrong, settled deep within her. She shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting around as the onlookers' gazes remained fixed on her. There was no escape from the judgment now. The crowd that had once been silent with curiosity now buzzed with murmurs, their glances filled with silent disapproval. A few exchanged knowing looks, while others couldn't help but shake their heads. Having been fully briefed on the situation, the security officer stepped forward. His stance was firm, and his eyes met Karen's, silently conveying that the spectacle was over. Without a word, he gestured toward the exit, guiding her out of the first-class line. Karen hesitated for a brief moment, clearly hoping for some shred of sympathy, but none came. The crowd parted slightly to allow her passage, but there were no sympathetic glances, only cold stares. She strolled, head down, her confidence shattered, and her mistake was too heavy to carry. The whispers followed her, some taunting, others more sympathetic, but none were willing to overlook what had just happened. Elon watched the entire scene unfold calmly. He didn't gloat or show any satisfaction at her humiliation. His expression remained neutral, as though he had expected nothing less. But as Karen disappeared into the distance, his calm voice filled the air for those still listening. Respect, Elon said, his tone steady and clear, isn't earned by what you wear or where you stand in line. It's earned by how you treat people, regardless of who they are or how they look. His words were simple, but they carried weight. The crowd, now fully aware of the lesson he had just imparted, absorbed the meaning. Elon's message wasn't about proving a point or seeking revenge. It was about showing the world that genuine respect comes from understanding, not judgment. Elon paused momentarily, allowing the crowd to reflect on his words, before returning to the security officer. With a subtle nod, he resumed his place in line, his quiet wisdom lingering in the air long after the confrontation had ended. The people around him watched, some with newfound respect, others with a deeper understanding of the true power of kindness and humility. And for Elon, it was just another reminder that sometimes the best way to handle ignorance was with grace, not anger. The tension from the confrontation seemed to dissipate as Elon stepped forward to board the plane. The ordeal was behind him now, a fleeting moment in the long journey of his life. He nodded his boarding pass to the flight attendant, his calm composure returning as though nothing had happened. As he walked down the aisle, settling into his first-class seat, the flight attendant, a young woman with a warm smile, leaned in slightly. "I have to say," she began, her voice soft but genuine, "that was impressive. You handled everything with such calm, especially with all the pressure." Elon gave her a small, appreciative smile. "Sometimes all you can do is stay calm," he replied, his tone steady. "The last thing you want is to escalate things when they don't need to be." The flight attendant nodded, admiring his poise, and walked away to attend to other passengers. Elon leaned back in his seat, his thoughts wandering as the plane began to taxi down the runway. The hum of the engines filled the space, but his mind was elsewhere, reflecting on the events that had just unfolded. As the plane ascended into the sky, Elon thought about how often people let their biases dictate their actions, how easily assumptions could be made, and how quickly judgments were passed. He had repeatedly seen people acting on appearances, making snap decisions without understanding the whole picture. But what stood out to him most was how powerful calmness could be. In that moment of confrontation, when Karen had pushed him to the edge, he could have lashed out. He could have let his frustration boil over. Instead, he chose to stay composed and take control of the situation without giving in to anger. In doing so, he had not only diffused the tension, but also delivered a quiet but powerful message that respect and dignity could be far more impactful than a quick retort or an emotional reaction. As the plane soared higher, Elon felt a sense of quiet resolution. There was nothing to prove to anyone. The lesson had been learned, and not just by Karen. Everyone watching had witnessed the power of calm, the strength and restraint. Ultimately, it wasn't about winning the confrontation, but how you carried yourself in those moments. As Elon sat there, looking out at the clouds below, he realized that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is remain true to who you are. As the plane settled into its flight, Elon could finally relax, the initial tension of the confrontation now fading into the background. But just as he was about to settle deeper into his seat, a young boy in the row across from him caught his attention. The boy, no older than 10, was peeking over the seat, his wide eyes fixed on Elon. Elon noticed the boy's gaze, and before he could turn away, the boy's father gently nudged him, whispering something Elon couldn't hear. The boy's face lit up, and with a shy grin, he waved at Elon. Elon returned the wave without missing a beat, a small but sincere smile forming. The boy's father, noticing the exchange, whispered proudly, "Yes, that's Elon Musk." The boy's grin widened, his excitement palpable. Elon's smile grew as he looked at the boy, seeing in him the same kind of wide-eyed curiosity he had once had. A curiosity not clouded by assumptions or judgments but fueled by wonder. Elon leaned forward slightly, meeting the boy's gaze. "Hey, what do you want to be when you grow up?" he asked genuinely. The boy's eyes shone as he confidently replied, "An inventor like you." Elon's smile deepened, and he gently tousled the boy's hair. "Well, don't let anyone tell you where you belong," he said, his voice warm yet firm. "Always believe in yourself. The world needs more people like you." The boy nodded eagerly, clearly inspired by the simple but profound words. As Elon straightened up and moved back to his seat, he felt a sense of peace. The day had started with a confrontation, a test of patience, and a moment of unwarranted judgment. But now, as he looked out of the window at the clouds below, he realized that despite the initial tension, the day had ended on a hopeful note. In that brief interaction with the young boy, Elon reminded not just him but himself as well that the power to create change and make a difference began with self-belief and the courage to remain true to who you are. Walking away from the moment, Elon felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The confrontation was forgotten, replaced by the warmth of knowing that sometimes a small gesture, like a word of encouragement, could ripple out and impact the future. Jack Miller was a man whose life had been shaped by hardship and resilience. As a Marine Corps veteran, he had faced the harshest realities on foreign battlefields, where courage was a daily necessity and survival was never a certainty. Yet, returning home brought him face to face with a different kind of war, a personal fight to find his place in a world that seemed to have moved on without him. The vibrant streets of Manhattan were alive with energy, yet Jack felt like a ghost among the crowd. His once proud uniform and gleaming medals were now distant memories, replaced by worn-out clothes and a face weathered by both combat and the struggles of civilian life. Nights were spent in crowded shelters, days in an endless and fruitless search for work. The haunting echoes of PTSD disrupted his sleep, while the crushing weight of unemployment left him feeling adrift. Despite his sacrifices for his country, Jack had become just another forgotten veteran in a society that seemed to look past him. One freezing night, as snow blanketed the city, Jack sought refuge at a soup kitchen run by compassionate volunteers. Among them was Emma, a kind-hearted woman whose empathetic nature set her apart. She listened intently as Jack recounted his experiences, his years of service, the comrades he had lost, and the profound sense of abandonment that lingered. Emma encouraged him to take action, to share his story with someone who had the power to bring about real change. Hesitant but desperate for hope, Jack followed her advice and penned a deeply personal letter to President Donald Trump, pouring his heart into every word. Weeks went by, and Jack's days continued in their bleak, unchanging rhythm. Then, one morning, he received an envelope marked with the presidential seal. Inside was an invitation to the White House. Shocked and uncertain, Jack made the journey to Washington, where he sat down with the president. In their meeting, Jack spoke with raw honesty about the struggles veterans like him faced, highlighting the urgent need for effective support systems that address their challenges head-on. Moved by Jack's powerful story, President Trump made a bold decision. Together, they launched the Bravo Company Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting veterans through a wide range of services. Jack was asked to lead the initiative, a responsibility he accepted with a mix of pride and uncertainty. Determined to turn his pain into purpose, he vowed to ensure no veteran would ever feel as abandoned as he once had. The Bravo Company Fund started as a small organization, but quickly captured the nation's attention. Jack devoted himself fully to the mission, reaching out to communities across the country. He met veterans from all walks of life, each carrying their own battles and stories of perseverance. Under Jack's leadership, the fund rolled out groundbreaking programs designed to address the complex needs of veterans. One of the fund's earliest triumphs was the Homes for Heroes initiative, which transformed abandoned buildings into affordable housing for veterans. These weren't just shelters. They were vibrant communities, complete with counseling services, job training centers, and recreational facilities. Veterans who had once been homeless now had a place to call home, and the resources they needed to rebuild their lives. Another cornerstone program was the Employment Initiative, which partnered with companies across various industries to provide veterans with job training and placement opportunities. Jack personally engaged with CEOs, urging them to see the immense value in hiring veterans. The program not only provided meaningful employment, but also restored a sense of purpose and dignity to those who had once felt invisible. As the fund grew, so did Jack's influence. He became a fierce advocate for veterans, speaking at conferences, testifying before Congress, and appearing on major news networks. His story resonated with millions, inspiring people to contribute their time, money, and resources to the cause. The Bravo Company Fund became a beacon of hope, proving that one act of compassion could spark a movement. Despite his rising fame, Jack never lost sight of the veterans he served. He spent countless hours visiting shelters and hospitals, listening to their stories and offering words of encouragement. One moment in particular stood out when he met Sarah, a young veteran struggling with severe PTSD. Jack opened up about his own battles, reassuring her that healing was possible. Touched by his words, Sarah found the strength to seek help and eventually pursued a degree in social work, dedicating herself to helping others like her. Over the years, Jack's relentless commitment changed the lives of tens of thousands of veterans. His efforts were honored with numerous accolades, including the prestigious Presidential Medal of Freedom. Yet, Jack remained grounded, always attributing his success to the veterans who inspired him and the supporters who believed in his mission. As Jack neared his 70s, he began preparing for the future of the Bravo Company Fund. He assembled a strong leadership team and put in place a sustainable funding model, ensuring the organization would continue its vital work long after he was gone. On his 70th birthday, Jack officially retired from his role as director, passing the torch to a new generation of leaders. In his farewell speech at the fund's national headquarters, Jack reflected on his journey. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about every veteran who ever felt forgotten. It's about the power of community, compassion, and the belief that no one is beyond hope." Jack retired to a quiet farmhouse in upstate New York, but he remained an active mentor and advisor to the organization. Years later, his legacy was forever honored when the National Veterans Center in Washington, D.C. was renamed the Jack Miller Memorial Center. A statue of Jack was placed in its courtyard, not as a hero, but as a man of the people, extending a hand of hope. Each Veterans Day, thousands gather at the center to honor Jack's memory and celebrate the lives he touched. His story continues to inspire generations, a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, one person's determination can spark a wave of change. Jack Miller's legacy is carved not just in stone, but in the hearts of those whose lives were transformed by his unwavering dedication.